IVM.
Hi, I'm Zarina Poonawalla, your peak performance coach, life coach, emotional intelligence practitioner, and NLP practitioner. I'm also the founder of Abso Expertise Unique, and my organization constantly aims at building leaders across continents. After having worked with so many dynamic business honchos, entrepreneurs, startups, CEOs, management gurus, parents, and student communities worldwide, I am convinced that every individual has unleashed potential, and all we really need to do is realize it. Watch the magic unfold, enhance quality of life, relationships, and professions. On my show, be ready for some riveting conversations with inspirational people, snippets, stories, and much more. So here I am on this exceptional journey to find empowerment and inspiration anywhere I can. Come join me on this breathtaking path of self-realization, potential maximization, positivity, and most of all, embrace your inner power. You are on your way to empowering yourselves. Welcome to the Empowering Series with Zarina Poonawalla. On today's episode, I'm in conversation with an exceptional artist, composer, orchestrator, and entrepreneur. Working out of LA and India, he has recently released his debut track, You're Not Alone, with prominent vocalists Sid Sriram and Shilpa Rao. Please welcome Surya Giri. Hi, Surya.
Hi, Zarina. How are you doing? Good morning.
I'm good. Good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good. Safe and sound. Can't complain.
Wonderful. So, Surya, I also believe you go by the name of Surii, right?
That's right. So, Surii is the musical persona under which we started pushing out the solo tracks. Absolutely.
That's nice. That's nice. I'm going to try and mix it up if I can. And I'm comfortable with calling you both if you are.
Sure thing.
So, firstly, let me congratulate you on your track. I think it's a wonderful piece, and I've personally heard it fantastic. I'm just wondering that it's been such a turbulent year for everybody overall. And I'm saying here now safely because we've crossed, beyond 6 months of the year in the pandemic, right? So it's been kind of turbulent for people, but you've made full use of it, Surya. How is that?
That's a good point. I think it's been an exceptionally difficult year for me as well. I think it's been a moment where I think any plans we did have for 2010 were entirely upended, and that immediately took into account the fact that folks had to start thinking about how they might completely think about working in new ways. How do they construct their lives, their daily routines, and of course their mental landscapes, right, in completely new ways. So, and I think no one anticipated that we'd still be under lockdown, here in October.
I know, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the big messages of the track, and one thing that we were trying to pull together when we were recording and polishing this up, was just this fact: like, how do we start to deal with these with the way the world is working at the moment?
Right, but it's pretty interesting. And before we get into the track, it would be lovely if we can get to know a little bit about your journey, because you've been working in LA and India, and you've also successfully established yourself as an entrepreneur, right? So you're definitely doing a lot of things, and you do have your fingers in too many pies. So it would be lovely to know how you've been managing all of this, and how did it all start for you, Surya?
Absolutely. So great question. I think, step one of the journey was, I think at a point when I was about 3 years old or so, my mom and my dad especially actually encouraged me to start taking piano lessons. And at that point, I wanted nothing to do with music. I was like, I'd rather watch cartoons. But I think the moment my mom started stacking up pillows, and I would sit on top of these pillows to reach the piano, it became a bit of an obsession. I fell in love with the process of creating music, the process of finding sounds, and that. So after learning a little bit of piano, and this is Western classical piano. So you're learning, everything from a Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and then you're slowly gravitating towards Bach, and learning some basics of composition in the process. What started to intrigue me was really all these other instruments, right? I started learning the violin around 8 or 9, if I'm not mistaken, and then started teaching myself a number of other instruments, both in Western and Carnatic classical.
Wow.
And just the love grew, so I started picking up the drums,
Hmm.
the keyboard, the guitar, the bass, et cetera, et cetera. And that, slowly led to an obsession with production, right? Because the psychology of any sort of piece of music is so fascinating to me. I think it's really important to be able to see both, the micro and the macro in a piece of music. And a lot of these, what I was really obsessed with was the idea that so many composers, right, have this intentionality behind why they've picked this very specific instrument to play this very specific sound.
Right.
Um, at a particular moment, right? And so that that fascination grew into I started learning composition and teaching myself formally working as well in the composition world for a little bit as well before branching out on my own. And at that point, I started composing a little bit for Al Jazeera, some other documentaries, films, advertisements, and I'm really, really excited to actually start finally, after this whole saga,
Yeah,
start putting
we can
things
call
out
it
on my
that.
own.
That's fantastic. And how about the business side of
Mhm,
things? How did you manage to
mhm,
make sure that you could actually run a business when you started playing instruments from a very young age, and then you only grow into this whole, music environment around you that you've created? It's a small world
mhm.
of your own. So how did business happen to you?
That's a great question. So I graduated from the University of Chicago,
Mhm.
2016, and while I was at school, I became increasingly fascinated with technology and sort of the products and services, and a good deal of my time was spent thinking, if I had to put something out in the world, what
Right,
would that be, right? How do we, from whatever angle, how do we ensure that something that we create is actually doing good to the world? One, two is creating some sort of sustainable lifestyle for the
right.
people that work for it. So at that point, I was, the entrepreneurship bug bit me. We, we did the whole, startup competition in school,
Hmm.
the whole gamut of activities, and that was a good learning experience. And thereafter, actually, so within school, I built a small music startup. We ran it for a little bit, and then had to, had to focus back on studies before, they kicked me out of school. So, very long story short, right after graduating from U Chicago, I spent a good deal of time thinking about if I had to build something, what would that look like? And at that point, my family had been in textiles. Specifically, my mother has been part of a very rich history
Hmm.
of preserving and ensuring textiles, motifs, techniques are saved, carried on to the next generation. And at that point, despite having such proximity to it my entire life, I realized that I knew absolutely zero about India's textile traditions and how much we had to offer the world.
Right.
And very long story short, at that point, I decided to. I had this moment where I saw a number of weavers within our team weave a garment from scratch, and I realized that this was a dying tradition. And we began, and their SGBG began. So SGBG Atelier is essentially it's a brand that focuses on women's wear, but is doing a lot of interesting things with menswear now too. Wherein we're preserving a lot of these ancient textiles, traditions, motifs, techniques, and springing that forward in a way that's hopefully quite interesting. And so it's been a phenomenal journey, I think, and it's been a great learning experience, wonderful team to work with. We have, presented at the UN Sustainable Development Goals Showcase, been part of Paris Fashion Week for their ethical edit. We were invited to headline the Young Guns Gen Z design showcase for India Fashion Week
Right.
uh, last year, and it's been a wonderful experience. We're just trying to ensure that our weavers and
That's quite
our
a journey.
artisanship continues.
Now, that's quite a journey. And I think the fact that you have all your creative juices all mixed up there, there's part of you doing music, there's part of you that's composing, there's writing, there's singing and whatnot. And then there's also this where you're making sure that there's some traditional value you're bringing, you've got management skills and you've got some other skills going on there. So that's quite holistic, I'd say, Surya.
It's a good point, right? I think the point you're referring to is how do you do this without getting too fragmented, right? And
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and it's definitely a task. I think a lot of it comes down to having a phenomenal team and just being incredibly rigorous and disciplined with one's time. And just trying to cut to output as soon as possible. Especially, I think as a creative, I find a lot of my brain just sort of floating in free space, whereas the business side requires you to say, okay, that's wonderful, but how do I shape this? What are we trying to build out of this?
Right, right. But that's fascinating. And I'm sure that the combination really, increases the knowledge and also allows you to experience very different dynamics in business, in culture, in music. And that's fantastic. I mean, that's something. Now, coming back to this song, the track, how has the experience been working with Shilpa Rao and Sid Sriram, considering that, this was a collaboration which probably turned out to be an exciting one for you?
Absolutely. It's been so the story of the track is it's been long brewing in the sense that the track itself had originated as just one of those 4 a.m. sketches. It had come out of the moonlight. It was just something that moved me at that time. And I mean,
Mhm.
listening back to the original version is completely different from what it has now. I mean, just testament to Sid and Shilpa's immense contribution to the track. So the track started out at this as a sketch, and there was this one particular turning point wherein a few years ago, my grandfather had passed away, and at that point, I was in our ancestral village, and uh, I don't know if you've ever felt this, but there's this sort of, there was this, amidst all the turmoil of the emotions and the
Mhm.
turbulence of everything, the logistics of this whole scenario,
Yes, yes.
there was a moment of immense vivid clarity wherein I suddenly saw the whole shape of the track, the entire arc, the story it was telling. I saw the purpose of the track and I saw the intention of that track. And effectively, from there, it was just a matter of building that out. And at that moment, I knew that the right people to carry this experience, the right people to carry that emotion in their voice would be Sid and Shilpa. And it was such a dream to come together on this, and they are just such. Their immense talent is a given. That's just a given at this point. But what really was so wonderful during the process was how committed they were to the track and how incredibly intentional they were. You can hear how much they brought of their own experience into the track just in their renditions, and it was such a joy during the recording process. Even despite COVID,
Hmm.
us creating the overdubs, trying to create the layers and the sonics, etc. Even remotely was quite a just such a joyous experience because
Hmm.
it was almost one take every time, then done.
Oh,
We're
wow.
like that. That's it. So any takes we would do after that, it's like, well, we have it. it's
I can
there.
imagine. Also, a big learning experience for you. Firstly, sorry for your loss, but that's how human life is. Even in the middle of chaos and loss, we probably have pictures of something that is capable and possible, and it's beautiful. It's just, it's bittersweet. I don't know how to put it, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's that sort of that sense of melancholy. I think is pervasive in the track, but it also has that sort of message of hope that there is resilience, right? At the end of the day, that we have to build and think back on.
Truly, truly. And working with people who have, been prominent, have been distinguished in the industry, has it
Mhm.
been a learning experience for you, Surya?
Absolutely. I think, I have been very, very blessed early on to work with some very phenomenal musicians and phenomenal composers. But working with Sid and Shilpa especially was such a wonderful learning experience in the sense that they taught me a lot about my own track and the way I compose and the way that they think, most importantly.
Right.
Uh, because at one point when you're going into the studio, you say, okay, great, I have this backing track. I've spent hours and hours and hours sculpting these individual pieces, and then
Hmm.
you go in and you realize at the end of the day it's all about the emotion. No matter how much science you put into it, right? How much thinking, it at the end of the day it's just about that emotion that you're capturing, and the way they will teach you things about the way that you construct the track and think about it, right? And ultimately they will hear it in the way that the listener hears it. And it was so beautifully refreshing and such an incredible learning experience.
That's amazing. And what's the message that You're Not Alone literally is trying to give all its listeners?
That's a good question. I think so. It starts off as, I think there are a few layers here. I think the first is it's this sense of, as we move into this very tumultuous time, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we start to navigate that from within ourselves? I think that that's the key message. How do we ensure that as we continue to move through the world, the sort of arc and trajectory of your own life, and it's okay not to be okay, is kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
one of the message here.
Yes. Yes.
There are a few lines from the track. I think at the very beginning, remember how you'd held my face sink into a secret place. Remember how with a single hand you covered the whole sky. It's about the sense of limitless potential, right? The track itself is about this version of oneself that is represented by myself in the track, and then there's Sid and Shilpa who represent the sort of future self in the track, and that sort of dialogue keeps. It starts off solo, and then it starts weaving, 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 and then it just crescendos into this massive chorus, this
Yes.
big explosiveness at the end, and it's that moment, of looking at in between who you were and who you might have been, and that I think is the crux of the song. It's looking at any given point of time, you are always sort of in this liminal in between space, right? Of will you live up to every expectation you've set for yourself? Will you live up to that? And long story short, if as the track moves, you're the faults you forgive, you're the blame that you lived, lighthouse in the daylight, your time will come. So full of tomorrows, who you were and might have been. And then this character starts asking this sort of future self, and the future self is asking the past self, is it everything you've ever dreamed? You're everything I need to be. And that's when the hook comes in, which is passed on from the guitar and the piano.
Mm-hmm.
You're not alone. And at that point, all the voices sort of start interlocking. They say, take a breath, you'll be okay. The walls will bend. Hold on to hope. I know you'll find your way. And I think that's, yeah, to take you through the arc of it. That's what we're trying to say.
My favorite part of your track, if I may, is,
Please.
I'm only a glass for the water. Can a chime hold the wind? I think it's so metaphoric. I just fell in love with that line. And
Thank you.
the track itself, it just makes you, it's ironic, it makes you feel alive, and at the same time, it calms you down. So it's really amazing the way you've created it. And the story behind it, like you just mentioned, Surya, that you, a past self, and then your future self, and the concept of hope being put together like that, it's so beautiful. It's just
Thank
beautifully
you.
depicted, really.
No, thank you. So immensely, grateful that it resonates. Thank you.
It does, and it's fantastic. And I'm telling you, that line is just amazing,
Thank you.
And I think that's the line you missed out right now when you mentioned. So I'm glad I got a chance to say it.
Thank you. The most beautiful part about music is, it's this, you never know, right? What someone really, what hits, what really pierces,
Right.
pierces through. And it's so beautiful to see that, because to be quite honest, right? A lot of it is theory, right?
Right.
And especially after a point you're thinking about it, you're so in your own head, right? Even during the process of releasing the song,
Mhm.
etc. So these moments where you're, talking to people who listen to it and who have such a beautiful resonance with it, it's so important because it tells you, it's so open. Music is this beautiful blank canvas, right? That allows people to
Absolutely.
bring their own lives into it.
Absolutely. And having said that, Surya, do you think it's also challenging to be an artist?
Absolutely. I think it's
And I
the
just been a-
$1,000,000 question.
I think it's important to know because there are so many artists out there and so many haven't been able to get that break or feel that their
Mhm.
journey has moved forward. So,
Mhm.
did it take you a while to really feel that, yes, now this is it for me and, here I am?
Mhm.
So it's definitely, it's not an easy road to tread, So what are your challenges like?
Absolutely. No, it's a very good question. I think on a number of fronts. The first dimension is expectation, and
Mhm.
that's self-expectation and understanding what you want out of the music. It's very easy for everyone to say, hey, I want to sell, I want to be a multi-platinum artist, and I want to, tour the world. I want to do this. I want to do that with music, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which are incredibly, incredibly important, valid goals to set. But it's also thinking about, okay, why am I making this music? Is it for other people? Is it for myself? What do I want out of it, right? And in that process, I think it really comes down to, for me personally, it's really about just creating these really beautiful, powerful experiences. These sort of miniature epics is my goal, and of course, the more people that get to see it, brilliant. But and before I get to the sort of the more clinical, business, analytical side of it, for me, it's been such a struggle to get to this point, to actually just release music. My mix engineers, my team, all hate me. So I've been sitting on about like 17 tracks for donkey years at this point. So it for me, it's a sense of trying to really get it to that point where it is, a lot of these messages are so subliminal, right? And sculpting the tracks, sculpting the lyrics, uh, creating the right frame, the visuals, everything, right? There's about a million and one things to think of. And for me, there's a sense, I have this immense self pressure that I set on myself. And I don't know if it's healthy, but um, to make sure that this track is to the highest potential it could be.
Right.
And I think I'm still working on trying to get over that, because at one point it's just about putting it out there in the world, and there's always room for improvement. There's always room to move past it. It's very important. But there's this one poem that haunts me. I think every time I think about this, I think it's why I can never pronounce the name, but Czesław Miłosz. I'm forgetting the exact line, but it's something like a mighty whirl of almost galaxies beyond nearly windows and pure radiance that has never experienced clouds. To get that purity of clarity in one's music and one's output, that's a gold standard, right? So trying to fight towards that, it may not always be healthy, but it's something that I think is just inbuilt. So figuring that out. So that's one. Two is with respect to the actual economics of everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the second part of your question. With respect to the actual math of being an artist in today's world, and especially one that has been, facing the COVID blight,
Right.
there are effectively a few, prominent streams of a musician's income in today's world, and a lot of those have been cut off or are changing dramatically, at least in today's era. So thinking about how one has to perform in the streaming world, perform with respect to additional, revenue sources, it's changed the game completely. And I think the moment the unbundling of music happened, with respect to Apple unbundling the album, right? So
Right.
people didn't really care about, hey, in the old days, I'd spend $9.99 on one bundle of 10 songs, and I wouldn't have a choice as to which of those songs I would pick. Now I can say, I only want this song. I'll pay $1.99 or I'll pay 99 cents for it. Nowadays, I can just stream that for free, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus paying for it. So navigating the economics, I think there is, a rising tide does float all boats. And I think, streaming is here to stay. Streaming is actually going to push the world forward in a lot of ways by, counteracting piracy, etc. But I think there's a long way to go in terms of making being an artist completely sustainable.
Right. Right. And that was, in fact, part of my question to you next. And I think you've partially answered that. What shift do you see in the industry in the future?
Mm-hmm. So technology, I think, is an inevitable force, and the fact that it has righted many wrongs thus far is a phenomenal thing, I think, for many artists, right? We're looking at a level playing field in many respects, right? Where you wouldn't see the sheer volume of artists that you do see today simply because the means were not accessible. To put out music, you would need, XYZ equipment, you need studio time, you need the investment to be able to pursue that. Forget the rest of the equation, right? After that, so nowadays, technology has solved that by creating really affordable, accessible ways to build and record music.
Mm-hmm.
And that's becoming more and more affordable by the day. So that's phenomenal. More and more people are putting out their visions out into the world, which is great. The difficult part is with respect to actually ensuring that people are listening to said music, right? So there are certain models today that show that you needn't be backed by a label. that you can find many alternative sources to promote your music and speak directly to your audiences. And that itself is simply a pure function of technology's ability to obliterate some of the middlemen in the equation. However, there's a different form of gatekeeper nowadays, right? And ensuring that one passes those checks is, I think, the current state we're in. So I think there is a future in which data as well as emotion will continue to play together, right? Right now, it's a very tricky balance, right? For an algorithm to find exactly what, how does one capture a lot of these parameters and attributes of a listenership, right?
Right.
Within data. So I think that will take time to evolve, but I think there's a bright future forward.
That's progressive thinking, I'd say. And I think we have, the right thoughts about what the ultra modern age is going to look like for the music industry, I'm guessing. Also, you have worked, like I said, internationally. You've had a chance to work in film and media in LA, and of course, you worked in India. Do you see a difference in, the mode of operations in different countries? Do you see that there's culturally a difference in professionalism?
It's a good question. I think with respect to professionalism, I think what I have been privileged to see is quite an exceptional level on both ends, whether it's India, whether it's LA sound stages. The I think the difference comes in with respect to what the end product is, right? So
Right.
I think the primary difficulty, I think for many independent musicians here, is that the mode of communication, the format, if you will, right,
Yeah.
is pre-baked as a lot of as film music, right, which is fantastic. Film music is an art in and of itself, and it's a very powerful mode of communication. But I think slowly, and we're slowly seeing this shift. Independent music has begun to rise. Right, we're able to see a much greater number of musicians able to push their art forward today versus, let's say, 10 years ago. Right, we had a handful of musicians on the scene who were moving the needle forward. So I think with respect to working environments, I don't see a massive change. I see it's fundamentally an issue of budget, right? At one point, right? If you want to record an orchestra, it's difficult to do so on an indie musician's budget, right?
Right.
So I think that's one thing. Whereas in the States, there is potentially a provision to find and cobble together a set of musicians to be able to do that for you. So it's a balance.
That's well put, actually. Quite interesting. So, having said that, I'm sure that there are promising musicians and composers out there, who aim to grow, but somehow they aren't able to have that eureka moment for
Mm-hmm,
themselves.
mm-hmm.
What is your advice or, words of wisdom, if you may, for nascent artists, composers, musicians?
It's a good question. I think I'm no expert. I wouldn't presume to be an expert here, but I think the key piece, there are two things for me. I think one is intention and vision, right?
Mhm.
To have that clarity in terms of why does this music need to be out there? Why do I, of all people, need to put this out? If I wrote this song today, should I be releasing it or should someone else be releasing it? And to have that distinction and clarity in one's message, and that's as philosophical as it is here, but also as tactical as how do we actually translate that into our visuals, into our artwork, into our logo, into our collaterals, etc. Right, as well as what sonic choices am I making, right? That intention and clarity is so important, I think, because I think a lot of people release music that necessarily isn't their own, right? And I think for a young artist, it's about just thinking very deeply about what it is that you want to say. That's one. Part two is, of course, the question is, how do you get the people out there to listen to it? Right? There's plenty of good music, as you mentioned before, very rightly so. The volume of music that is consumable today is so much greater than before, right? Before we'd be limited to, I would play the same same Ilayaraja cassette
Mm-hmm.
or CD 50 times over because that was pretty much all we had, right, in the house.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays, I have Spotify, I have Apple Music, I have Deezer, what have you, right? And I can immediately flip to any n number of songs that I can see out in the universe, and that choice can be frightening, right, for a young artist, right? How do I compete? How do I think about where I sit in that whole universe?
Mm-hmm.
My humble opinion is that that doesn't matter at all. It's not a zero-sum game. There's no mutual exclusivity within which artist one will listen to, or whose merch I will buy, whose concert I will go to. It's not a zero-sum game. So I think it's so important to just believe in the music, believe in what you're trying to say, put that out there, and consistency. If you glue those things together, I think people will come.
That's really sound advice, Surya. Also, the fact that we have so much demand that there is something for everybody out there. If you just know how to place it right and make it happen the right way, I think it all works out for everyone.
Absolutely, and it's a difficult business. There's no way to disguise that. But it's also important just to continue for the reasons that you want to continue. It's very important.
Yeah, that brings me to this question. How do you motivate yourself? Considering that when you're in the creative industry and wouldn't say recognition or validation, but when there are those lows or days when you feel like, nobody's recognizing your value or potential, how do you motivate yourself?
No, it's a great question. So that's the hardest part. You're absolutely right, Zarina. I think it's easy, and especially for a lot of folks to hear sort of the positive spin, the positive PR around any project. That's what people hear, right?
Exactly.
You're absolutely right. How did someone go about, in the process, it's not always sunshine and roses. I think there is a point at every day, let's take it all the way back, upstream. You look at the very beginning, the inception of a track. There's so many moments where you're like, my God, this is terrible. Like, I have no idea whether this even makes sense. This doesn't click right. This sound is wrong. My mix is terrible. I'm a terrible songwriter. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Right? There's several of those moments I think that everyone goes through, regardless of whether they're a musician or, whatever they are, whatever occupation they've chosen. Those are inevitable. But I think, powering through those moments and creating that discipline and creating that consistency in that push is so important. Whether you are learning one's craft, right? If you're learning your craft, creating that discipline and dedication to say that no matter how crap my output is, I will ensure that I will devote this much time to it. And eventually, analogy of a violin, right? Every parent, everyone who has gifted their kid a violin and, with great expectation and said, hey, please learn the violin, become the next, Yehudi Menahin. For the next 8 months, all they hear is screeching. It's very difficult for anyone to produce anything of good output, in those first few months, right? But it's just about powering through. It's just about getting past those initial difficulties, right? Getting those calluses, falling down a few times, and figuring out, okay, I need to get back up. How do I do that? And finding those little motivations through the day.
Zig Ziglar once said that people often say that motivation doesn't last. But then he said, well, neither does bathing. So that's why we recommend it daily. And you cannot just be motivated for once and think that motivation is going to last you a lifetime. It's something that you've got to work on every day, just like you work on your dreams and goals and whatnot. So that's I guess the message I give. You've got to keep upping yourself and making sure that you're getting there. And most importantly, like you mentioned, Surya, being consistent. I think that's important. Being consistent with the message, with the thought, with the idea.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I think, especially in the creation of this track, it took so long because I fundamentally didn't know. I didn't understand what I was trying to say at this point, and I didn't believe in it. But there was some inkling somewhere, even in that very first sketch, just on a little guitar at 4 a.m. And I knew there was some kernel of some idea somewhere. And along the way, it took a few friends to really push me on this. So it's about creating that ecosystem, creating that community, and just finding those little ways, absolutely, to egg yourself on. And the going will always be tough. Yeah. I don't think anyone, even after they've released a multi-platinum single, whether they've released 10 multi-platinum singles, whether they've been every single song of theirs has been a hit. I don't think there are always difficulties. So it's just finding the right ways to work through it.
That's fantastic.
I would actually ask you, how, any tips on, managing fragmentation, managing several different things. Because, Zarina, you run several pieces simultaneously. Running this podcast itself is a huge task coordination, planning, intention, getting the right folks on board. How do you manage fragmentation during the day? How do you balance?
I know that's interesting, right? Podcasting was one of the things I never thought I would be good at, but turns out I'm not so bad at it. And
It's brilliant.
two things that help you to manage this, to be able to wear all those hats together is one, having great teams and great resources, being able to delegate or leave the job to somebody else and not micromanage everything, because I think micromanaging takes away the whole idea of actually utilizing the resources that you have, because people out there that you have on your team can be really, really good with what they do. They're skilled and you've got to trust them. So I think one is not micromanaging and letting people do their bit and trusting your team. That's important. The other would be compartmentalization. Divide your day, know that you're going to give this. So I give coaching a specific time of the day. I give possibly a couple of webinars a specific time. I give maybe making a video or two a specific time of the week, because I hate that and I'm bad at it. So that is something I leave for last. But everything, so podcasting. So I think compartmentalization and trusting your team and having a good team and not micromanaging really works well.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's a great point. It's a great point.
Thank you. So, Surya, we're coming to the end of our conversation, and I'd love to know, to summarize it in a nutshell, what is this one belief you swear by?
Intention and vision will carry you all the way through, no doubt. I think it's very easy. A million people will tell you a million different things, but at the end of the day, right, you have to have that faith in what you're building. You have to whether it's a track, whether it is an artist persona, whether it is a brand, whether this is a technology product, whatever it is, you need to have intention and vision. Things will change inevitably on the way, right?
Right.
So the moment you have that intention locked from the get-go, you will know why you will be in it for the tough times, right? When that resilience and that strength and that community is required.
Fantastic. That's splendid. Surya, what are the compositions or tracks that we can expect in the future from you, and where can people listen to your tracks? Where do we find you?
Absolutely. So quite a few in the works, and we're actually starting to release one top of November and a few further through 2021. So really excited. You can probably find us on as Surii Vision on Instagram, and be available on all major streaming platforms as well as iTunes, etc.
Brilliant, superb. I think we know where to look for you now, and all the very best for all those upcoming tracks and this one for sure.
Thank you, Zarina. Thank you.
And lastly, most importantly, I have to not let you go without this particular question, Surya. So what empowers you?
That's easy. Family. Done. My family. It's really both my parents and my sister have been such guiding lights throughout the musical journey. When things have been tough, when things are great, it's always been them.
So what empowers you is family. Fantastic. Easy, but most important, I think. You can't take
Absolutely. And it's, especially nowadays, I'm not sure about you, but I spend most of my day looking straight into the confines of this, the 13-inch laptop, right? That is my world. From,
nothing else to do.
Exactly. So from 7 a.m. to, whatever wee hour, 3 a.m., you're just, you're locked in, right? So it's so important, especially nowadays, to really value all the relationships, whether that's family, that's friends, just, to make sure people are doing okay.
True. Absolutely true. Well, on that note, Surya, we've come to the end of this conversation. It's been, I'd say, superlative. having this conversation with you. Absolutely riveting. And you've given us so much thought, knowledge, and insight. Thank you for your time and congratulations on your track, You're Not Alone. Now, before you go, I don't know if this would be too much to ask for, but if you could just render a couple of words, as a conclusion to our conversation today on the Empowering series, Surya.
Thank you, Zarina. First and foremost, it's been an immense pleasure to be discussing this with you, and such an inspiration, Zarina. So thank you. Let's give it a go. Let's see how warmed up the vocals are. Remember how you held my face, sink into a secret place. Remember how with a single hand covered the whole sky. In between who you were, who you might have been.
Amazing.
If you liked this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So it's been a great week on the network, as it almost always is. Let me give you a couple of highlights that you should definitely check out. Chiki Sarkar was on This Round's on Me with Gauri Devi Dayal. Great conversation. Think you will really enjoy that. Shlok Ramachandran of our new show, Millennial Athlete, who guested on one of our older shows, Football Shirtball. He's a big football fan in addition to being a professional athlete. So I think it's a really interesting connection. And they had a great conversation about football just generally. Nankari, our new show about Indian food, hosted by Sadaf and Archit, talk about laddus this week and basically, how awesome they are. It's Diwali week, and I think that's an apt conversation for them to have. On the Wire Talks podcast, Siddharth Bhatia has a great conversation with Dylan Mohan Gray about his work on Bad Boy Billionaire, specifically around the Vijay Mallya episode. Definitely check out the conversation if you want to know more about that. And finally, let me recommend the Edges and Sledges Cricket podcast this week. They take a look back at the IPL 2020. They go over the final, Delhi versus Mumbai, and how that played out. And they also create their dream IPL 2020 fantasy team. Do check that out. I think you'll enjoy that as well. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Do you have a night routine? Well, everyone has one. And the to-do list usually looks like this. Brush your teeth, set that alarm, get into your pajamas, and switch off those screens. But here's one more to add to that list. Tune into the Positively Unlimited podcast for a dose of positive action and tips on how to build powerful mindsets. Episodes out every Monday on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you tune into podcasts.